Hello and welcome back to my third video for clinical neuromuscular intervention, where we talk about the general neural pathway. By way of reminder, we talked about in my first video action potentials, where a painful stimuli can activate, specifically in this scenario, a nociceptor and send a signal through these neurons to eventually to our spinal cord and to our brain, what I'm going to be talking about in this video. And that information is passed through action potentials and can be passed to other neurons, and that is what I talked about in my second video. But for this video, we're talking about the general neural pathway, so how this information is received, processed, and then sent out to have a motion done by our body in response to the painful stimuli. So before I get into the actual pathway, I want to talk about quickly two different types of movement. We have reflexes, which are an involuntary movement in response to a stimulus. So this would include like a knee-jerk reflex, touching a hot stove and you pulling your hand back automatically, or in this scenario, being poked by a sharp object. These are received by sensory receptor cells that go through an afferent pathway and that are processed in the reflex center or integration center, which for humans, which is the spinal cord and the brainstem. And then after it is processed, a signal is sent out on an efferent path and then eventually to the effector, which is a muscle. And that's the type of pathway that we're going to be talking about today. But the other type of movement is voluntary, and these are movements that are controlled by free will. So think about it from the simple statement, these are processed top down. So you process them in the cerebral cortex and you think about doing something before you actually move. So if I want to pick up this pencil off the table, I process it in my brain, I go and I pick it up. And that's something that I chose to do, as opposed to being poked by a sharp object and me pulling my hand away as a response to that. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So in this scenario, you have, with reflexes, you have kind of 6 different steps that I've broken this down into. You're poked by the painful stimuli, a sharp object, a pencil. This is received by the nociceptor, and these action potentials, this signal is sent to the central nervous system, in this case, the spinal cord, and this is the afferent pathway. So first you have the painful stimuli, activates the nociceptors. This triggers an action potential that travels down the afferent pathway. This is integrated in the spinal cord, and this is the integrating center. So this red line right here is this afferent pathway. You have this afferent pathway synapsing with a excitatory interneuron, which then goes along an efferent pathway. You have this afferent pathway also synapsing with an inhibitory interneuron, and then also synapsing with another interneuron that eventually will send up information to be sent up to the brain to be processed of awareness of pain and whatnot. But in the spinal cord, after this afferent pathway comes in the dorsal horn and in synapses with the excitatory interneuron and the inhibitory interneuron, you have this information being sent out back the front of the spinal cord. So it comes in the back, which is called the dorsal horn, sent out the front in an efferent pathway. You can see I have that right there, with the red being the excitatory and the blue being the inhibitory efferent response, and the excitatory going to the bicep muscle and the inhibitory going to the tricep muscle to cause the bicep muscle to flex and the tricep muscle to relax, causing your hand to come up and away from the painful stimuli. And this inhibitory response is just allows your tricep muscle to relax and for this flexion to occur. And then the rest of these interneurons, this information is sent to the brain.